Welcome back. Mark 𝗬𝗓 here from GC Realty Development and Straight Up Chicago Investor Podcast. Today I have 𝗦𝘃𝗲𝗀𝗃 on here with me. Marco, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So Marco, I appreciate you coming on here. You have a very unique story in the sense of your family and how you guys have your property in Arlington Heights. Can you give us a little background about your guys' property there in Arlington Heights?
Absolutely. So I'm first generation American. My parents immigrated to this country, to Chicago from Italy in the early 1960s. They lived in the Austin neighborhood. They lived across the street from each other. They met, married. And then my father actually designed and built our apartment building in the early 1970s. And we've had him ever since. And I grew up in the building, and I grew up in the area. I grew up in the building. And so, and now I actually help him manage it. My father's 81 years old. My mother's 75. I help him manage the building, and I help him manage it all the way from the West Loop neighborhood in Chicago. So this building is very personal to me. And I truly love it dearly, and it's a great building. It's a great community, and I'm really fortunate to witness my parents' story and to where we are today.
So the story you have is air quote, the American dream, in working hard, buying real estate, doing what you can to use the rents to provide a great place to live and pay down your mortgage and hopefully build on, which I think you said beforehand, they're using this for their retirement, this building.
That's correct. Absolutely. My parents, it's not like they were able to go work for a company right off the bat. They spoke very little English. Their English is much better now, but certainly when they first moved to this country, they had to learn it. They became U.S. citizens. They learned the language. Even to the point that, so they didn't go work for a company where they have a 401k option or a pension. So they had to find ways to feed for themselves. And my mother and father actually opened up their own business in the same office at Harlem and Foster, where my mother had her own travel agency and my father had his real estate business. And they operated out of the same office together. And that essentially was their careers, in addition to the additional income that came from the building. And now that they're long retired, they live off of the Social Security and the income from this one property. And it's put food on our table, clothes on our backs, and was able to put an education in front of us, to me and my brothers, and to really live comfortably and have a good life.
Well, so you have the classic story of, hands-on, self-managing, neighborhood, renting to the neighborhood, neighbors rent to neighbors. How do you think you were talking about how you read through the proposed ordinance? How do you think this is going to affect the management style, or how it could hurt your tenants that you have in there now and ones down the road?
No, absolutely. I think there could be a disruption in the peace and the disruption in the community, in the sense that, as they say, if you one rotten apple, it can spoil the bunch. And we don't live in a perfect society. I can't screen my tenants, everybody who comes through, perfectly. And so if I'm not able to not have access to the units, or if I'm not going to be able to remove a tenant who's causing disturbance to the community, then the whole building goes, and the rest of my tenants who are trying to live there peacefully are coming, complaining to me, asking me what I'm going to be doing, how are you going to get rid of this tenant, what's being done to mitigate the situation. Otherwise, then they threaten to leave, and I don't want them to move out, especially if they're enjoying where they're living. And I think that the ordinance that we have here prevents us from being able to cure the problem with a quick solution, and you try to remove the tenant that is causing that disturbance, so that we can continue to keep the peace in the building. And this way, people, when they, come home, they feel like they're at home and they're not in an apartment building. Because it's nice. I mean, we have a nice garden in our backyard. We have a nice patio back there. A lot of our tenants have come back to us, have always told us that they really do feel like they're at home. Whether it's presently or in the past, I could definitely get a lot of tenants to testify on our behalf that we really do care, and we really do treat our property like if it was our own home.
Without the ability of running your management of the building effectively the way you have, which sounds like from what you told me before and now, you guys have done an awesome job in keeping neighbors happy neighbors, and with something like this where you lose, for example, the right to serve a 10-day notice to cure a problem. You're now potentially risking losing the good tenants, displacing, not only do you lose them as the landlord, but now you're just inconveniencing these people that feel like they have to move because they can't, because they feel you can't deal with the issue at hand, and you're left holding the bad tenant.
No, absolutely. I mean, the extension from the 10-day eviction notice or 5 days for material noncompliance now to 30 days. That could cause a lot of problems, whether if they're drug dealing, playing loud music throughout the hours of the evening, loud barking dogs. It just causes a nuisance and, like I said, a disruptance in the peace in the community. So, yeah, it's tough. Yeah, no, I could hear the almost the anxiety or the stress in your voice on it. So you're a real estate broker, and a pretty damn good one, I heard. So you've done a lot. You've put in your time across the board. So that's pretty cool. You work with a lot of out-of-state investors, whether from each coast, not necessarily Wall Street money or anything like that, just small mom and pop investors investing out of state. What type of effect do you think the ordinance will have, or what have you been hearing around clients you work with? Yeah, absolutely. So we have been seeing an influx of coastal money or out-of-state money in general, but mostly coastal, whether it's coming from New York and not necessarily Wall Street guys, and certainly a lot from the West Coast, from California through Oregon and up to the state of Washington, mainly because they're seeing the cap rates compress. So they're looking at Chicago as a very stable market, stable economy. And furthermore, there's a lot of restrictions and ordinances that we're starting to see and influence in the Chicagoland area that are influenced from, like, the states of Oregon or California and even New York. So a lot of those investors are getting out of there because not only that Chicago is a stable market as an investment perspective, but also as a management perspective, where they're not restricted. There's a bit of a two-way street with landlords and tenants. However, with these ordinances, there is no two-way street. There is no two-way street. It basically just showing that the tenant has all the power and everything, and the landlord is just left with nothing. So I think if this ordinance gets passed the way it is now, or if they amend it to make it where it feels like a two-way street, then we'll still continue to see even the out-of-state investors investing in Chicago. If not, I've got clients already looking at different markets because of that already. And they're going to Texas as one. They may go to even Oklahoma. I have a client who invests a lot in Oklahoma City. So, yeah, I mean, we're going to start losing investors in the greater Chicagoland area.
I've seen an uptick in investors just looking over the border in Indiana, even though Indiana, they've always shied away from investing here. Now, after a decade or two, they're now all of a sudden asking questions on, like, hey, how's it over there? So I know personally I'm seeing that. So you bring up that interesting word of the two-way street. I think you'd agree, and anyone else that has been taking part in these conversations, they agree that regulation is not bad and rules are not bad. It just can't swing a pendulum way too far to the other side where you get a one-way street that's going to benefit one side or the other. In this situation, it's the tenants. So unintended consequences long-term. I think this is where a lot of these conversations are going, where a lot of this ordinance is put in place to protect residents and tenants, but in the long term, it potentially could, I hate to use the word backfire, but ultimately set in motion unintended consequences for tenants. So talk to me a little bit about what you think on that.
Yeah, I think it makes the screening process a lot more rigorous. Certainly can drive rental rates even higher. To compensate for any contingencies that can potentially be the outcome of this ordinance, because the landlord's got to, in a way, protect themselves in case a tenant decides to take them to court and run them dry. So you got to have to allocate some of the rent and put it into a contingency plan, or call it an RLTO plan, in case that does come. So therefore, they're increasing the rents, and you are now requiring a much more, how can I say it, a much more strict application process. You may not bend the rules whatsoever, even if their credit rating is poor. Let's say they ran into some sort of issue in the past, but yet they built themselves out of it and they're working at a company, and certainly they're reporting that their gross gross income is sufficient to be able to cover the rents. Because of maybe their track history or their past track history of the poor credit rating, landlords may require a better credit rating because of that.
Would you, I thought about adding an RTLO line item on your pro formas for anybody buying in Cook County on the investment pro formas.
Yeah, absolutely. So my thought is that if investors are starting to, or will start to put in an RLTO contingency plan in their pro formas as they're underwriting these properties, it will eventually lower the value of these properties, which in turn will lower the assessed value, and therefore it would affect the taxing body for the county and for local. So the schools are not going to get as much money as is where your tax dollars would go towards, as an example. So I think monetarily that does affect, at a government level, the real estate taxes, because you're not going to get as much because the properties are not valued as high.
Well, then also, if you have to make sure you have an RTL contingency fund set aside, you might decide to sit on that money versus redo a stairwell or repave the parking lot, or you might push those type of things that are going to improve the property, improve the neighborhood down the road a little.
Absolutely. I mean, as a small owner operator, our margins are already thin as it is. So if some of these ordinances allow, especially when it comes to the judicial, distinctions on this ordinance, where, and I know a lot of my counterparts have mentioned the words shall versus may in this ordinance. It really should allow the judge at their discretion, and they're very intelligent people. They're a judge for a reason. That I think within the law, they definitely use a lot of common sense. And if this ordinance allows the potential tenant to get us on a technicality and an oversight at a very small level, that because of the technicality of it, can take us to court. We could potentially lose the case, pay court fees and their fees, plus whatever time that we lost as a landlord and our fees, and income, it can add up to thousands of dollars for one unit for a small building where our margins are already thin. What then? And if we don't have the money to pay for it, what happens then? You know, how do we pay for that when we're, you know, already, like I said, already, how can I say this?
I got you.
Yeah.
I got you. I think our listeners got you too.
I lost my train of thought there.
No, it makes sense. Well, this is all great conversation. And any kind of wrapping or final thoughts or anything we didn't cover that you think is important to point out of how this is going to affect tenants or smaller landlords such as yourself?
Yeah, I just would like to say that the reason why we have leases is really to protect both the tenant and the landlord. I think they are in a way written up in a way that keeps everybody accountable. This ordinance doesn't give any accountability to the tenant. They can just leave at any time that they want, and the landlord is left with, you know, with an empty unit and missed payments, and may have to spend money into fixing up the unit. One thing I do want to add is, and I forgot to mention this, that I did not like about the ordinance has to deal with personal property. I've always given our tenants a fair notice saying, like, if you left anything behind, you know, within reason time, please come back and pick it up. By all means, I'll be happy to meet you there, come by and pick it up. But if now they're saying that we have to store or we have to hold on to their personal properties, well, if there's no space in our building to do that, we have to open up an account with self-storage, for example, and store their belongings for what, 12 months until they come back and pick it up, if they do. And
you have to move it there too. So there's a cost to move it there too.
And you have to move it over there. Quite frankly, my father is not going to pay for a mover. So imagine an 81-year-old man picking up a chair or a nightstand or whatever.
Yeah.
No.
Whole nother level of risk.
Yeah, and even this late fee stuff as well. It's like, we've never charged anybody a late fee in our building at all. I've worked with my tenants. I've had tenants that pay us bi-monthly, in the middle of the month, the end of the month. Never charged them a late fee. But because it's so low, what gives them incentive? What incentive is it to them mentally that, oh, it's only $10 or $15. What do I care if I'm going to be paying late? That's nothing. But if it's more than that, let's say it's 5% of the rental rate, then that's a lot more money. And that in the tenant's mind mentally shows that, hey, I better make sure I pay my rent. But we never charged anybody. But it's the principle of the matter to make sure that everybody is held accountable and stay true to their word and stay true to the lease on both ends of the spectrum, on both sides of the aisle. As a tenant and as a landlord, we have responsibilities for each other, to the property, and to people.
Yeah. Oh man, you couldn't have wrapped up that any better. And I love the point that you have the contract. The tenant agreed to sign that. No one forced him to sign it. And you know, as a landlord, to get tenants to sign a lease, it has to be a fair lease. So to be able to let that lease govern it versus tougher policy like this, it's such a good point that you made. So Marco, thank you very much. We will talk soon, hopefully with better conversation, more positive conversation, but you enjoy your holidays and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, Mark.